Uh, we got a forum post here from Cyrus8888, Android initial loading page. Greeting, I have 5 tab menus used on my Android app. Homepage, custom URL screen, menu button screen, menu list screen, and the other 2 are also custom URL screens. My idea is to load the home screen, which is the custom URL screen, as my initial loading page. But Buzztouch always loads the menu list screen as the first attempt. So if I remove the menu list screen from my tab menu, it then loads the menu button screen. How can I set this right? So basically, the way I interpret this question is that he's got multiple tabs, and instead of loading the first one, he wants to load the last one.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so not only does he want to load the last one, but another way to say that is he wants to load the last one. He wants to set what I would call the selected tab when the app launches. And so that actually is a great question. It's not one that I've heard in a long, long time. I heard it a long time ago, but I haven't heard it since. And so a couple of things to understand about Android tabs before we talk about a strategy, because I think it's important to put a little bit of a backstory on this. The first thing I will say about Android tabs in the current Android download that we're delivering, when you create a tabbed app and download the iOS version, which is very common, the tab bar is along the bottom, just like all the other iOS apps in the world. When you download the Android version of this same project, the tab bar is also along the bottom, and it shouldn't be. I say that because the common paradigm design pattern today is the Android tabs are across the top and iOS tabs are across the bottom. The reason that project is designed that way, and the reason that that tab bar is set up that way, is because in the early days of Android, tabs basically weren't supported at all. And so we did the best we could in making really what was a decision on our part to try to make both projects kind of similar. And so when you downloaded your iOS project and you download your Android project, the tab bars would be along the bottom. So with that being said, the latest Android project that we're working on that's almost ready to come out has a more consistent tab bar across the top like so many other Android tabs, and so we're very excited about that. So with that out of the way, I wanted to bring that up because it is a little bit important. So the reason that it's important as it relates to this question, what is the selected tab, is because Android in the early versions of Android didn't have a very well-refined approach to tab bars. They also didn't have a very simple way to say, so here's, select tab number 3. And so again, in the iOS Android comparison, because iOS began with tab bars, it makes sense that it would be kind of easy to select them with code or set the initial tab. But in Android, that wasn't the case. And so your project doesn't already have, the project that you have doesn't already have a quick method to do that. But let's jump into the code real quick and show you how to do it so that you can solve the problem with the idea that we really should be moving your Android tabbed app to a more modern approach with it at the top and different things. And so we'll leave that kind of subject where it is without getting too detailed. But I'm going to go in the I'm going to share my screen. I'm not sharing yet, I don't think. So let me share my screen, and we will explore a real basic file. Well, a basic concept in a more sophisticated file. I've got a debug app here with a bunch of Android files in it. And the file that we're talking about for your dilemma that you're in right now is called BT Activity Root Tabs. So Buzztouch Activity Root Tabs becomes, in essence, the controller for your tab bar layout that you're talking about. So I'm going to open this file. I'm going to scroll through it pretty quickly because we don't have time to go through the whole entire what do you call it? The whole entire source code file. We could do a whole discussion on that, but I wanted to show you this method called build interface using app data. And that's the method that runs, or I should say, this is the method that runs after your application reads or parses the configuration file, and it discovers that, hey, your app has 5 tabs or 3 tabs or 2 tabs, but in this case, remind me, Warren, was it 5 that we had or 4?
I don't know the number was stated, but let's see. It says
Okay.
there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. No, 5. You're correct. 5.
5 tabs. Okay. 5's pretty common. And so the application's read the configuration data. It's discovered that 5 tabs were used, and it does that parsing or that reading first, and then it runs this build interface using app data. And you'll see it checks to see if there are any tabs on line 243. And then on line 253, it discovers, hey, there are tabs. Let's do a for loop. And for each tab in the list, we're going to create the text label and the icon to add to the tab. And you can see here that it creates this tab and it creates the icon. And then it creates, it remembers the data for each of those tabs. And then it creates what's called a tab spec, which is part of a tab host. And that's, I won't get too technical about that, but what a tab spec is and a tab host is that was Android and Google, I guess, is first kind of go at supporting tabs. They have this tab spec concept. It's since been deprecated in Android 4.0 and above. This just isn't how you do it. But in your existing project, it's called a tab spec. And so what you do here is you'll notice that in this loop, you have the for loop, and then in order, it sets up the tabs and adds them to the screen. And then it sets the current tab right here on line 313. So you could change this set current tab to say 4, or set current tab to say 2. And the effect that you're going to get is exactly what you're talking about. You're going to find the tab in your list that you want it to begin at. And you can set that, and you will need to make that modification in your project. You won't be able to make that modification in the control panel. But based on this question, it does make sense to me now that in the layout area in the control panel, we should probably put a little drop-down box or a checkbox next to each tab so that you can say this is the default tab or something like that. So these are some of the reasons why we like doing these questions, is because we're constantly learning or whatever. So for this person, I can't remember his name. I'm a little embarrassed. I should.
It's Cyrus8888.
So Cyrus8888, hopefully that helps you. You're going to be working with the BT activity root tabs file in your project, and you're going to adjust line 313, which I think should make some sense. And what we will do is look for a way to add that to the control panel so you can add the selected tab. Great question. Did that make sense to you, Warren?
Yeah, I absolutely did. Absolutely.
We could, like I said, we could talk for a little while, but really what Android has gone to now, and I've been spending weeks on this actually, is this idea of fragments. And the difference between an Android activity, which kind of makes up every screen in an Android project now, or an Android app. An Android activity is very similar to an Android fragment in that they both go on the screen and they both hold little widgets like text views and buttons and images and things like that. They both have what's called the activity life cycle or the fragment life cycle. This is the very mysterious idea of when the fragment is created and destroyed and maintained in memory and all of that. The reason I'm bringing this up is the new tab bar, which is actually called an action bar in Android now, and it has tabs in the action bar. The new action bar, which supports tabs very well, is intended to be used with fragments and not activities. And the reason I'm bringing this up right now is there's been a little bit of a delay in our plugin market with getting a lot of plugins released because we're in the process of converting all the existing plugins in the Android side from activities to fragments. today a plugin is an activity, and in the future it will be a fragment. And the reason for that is, and the reason we're going through all this pain now, is because there's about 75 of them, is because once again, as things changed and as things matured and as the Android operating system and ecosystem has kind of grown up and really done so well, you know, improvements are made and things are discovered, and basically the paradigm now and the thinking now is I should be designing with fragments and not with the activities. And so we're going along with that trend and having to kind of do a little bit of dirty work right now that we don't enjoy. We just want to make new stuff. We don't want to have to worry about the old stuff, but we definitely have to bring it all up to speed, which is just the way it goes.
I fully understand. It's great. It's great that things are moving forward, and hopefully that'll bring the Android plugin market back into focus, because
right,
if you go look at the plugin market right now, almost all of them have an iOS version, but not all of them are Android. And it makes
yeah,
it, if you want to develop for iOS and Android, it makes it tough to make a choice on whether or not to use a plugin, because you basically only want to develop it one time and have your products out.
yeah, totally. We and once again, you know, as an organization, you know, as a site or a system or a tool or a platform, you know, Buzztouch is always doing what we think is best for the audience. And one of those things early on was, you know, hey, we had this iOS thing going, and let's support Android. Android didn't exist when we first started, and it made sense that we would try to support both platforms in the exact same kind of way. And in a lot of ways we've done well with that. In a lot of ways we just haven't. And the same thing was true with the developing world out there. You know, they wanted to make an app that worked both the same, and you hear this all of the time. I want an app that'll work the same on both devices. And really what they mean is they don't necessarily want it to look the same. They want it to work the same and function the same, but it is a very, very common mistake that I've made myself and that we as Buzztouch has made ourselves and plugin developers have made themselves on our direction. It's a very, very common mistake to try to take your design elements in your app and literally make them look the same in both devices. And the reason that is because people who use Android devices have a different set of expectations than people who use an iOS device. But the app owners and the app developers oftentimes try to trump that idea and say, I don't care if they have a different perspective. I want my app to look the same on both sides. Or maybe a client will force you into that frame of mind. And more and more and more, it's just becoming obvious that you can have two code bases that are the same, two sets of content, you know, that are the same for the same apps, but the design, you shouldn't be too worried about that. And we talked about that with the tabs. You know, the style and the way a tab bar works and an action bar works and an overflow menu and all these things in the Android is just different. And so we just need to learn how to embrace that. And with the plugins, it's the same thing. You know, there's not as much in our community as of yet. It doesn't seem like there's as much enthusiasm for Android, and it's hard to tell why. I think it's probably because we did this for quite a while without Android, and then we added it later. So a significant part of our audience, who are very enthusiastic and want to make things, are still iOS centric. And so slowly, I agree though that we should really work to try to help people support both sides.
Well, to back up to a statement you made just a minute ago, expound a little bit, because I need to understand what you mean by this. You say that from a user's perspective, an Android user's expectations are different than an iOS user. What do you mean by that?
Just certain behaviors in your device, certain patterns in the way that we use our devices are fundamentally different. I'll give you some small examples, but it does matter. Let's say that you have a link in your app to some simple web content. It's a web page. And whether you disguise it without an address bar or whether you make it look like a web page or not is not the discussion. But technically it comes from the web. It's web content. And so on both sides, on the Android world and the Apple world, you're using the built-in widget to show web content, and the widget in iOS is going to be called a UI web view, and the widget in Android is going to be just a web view. And so you load these web views with content, and then you start them or launch them or display them or whatever. In Android, when you load web content, you are oftentimes asked by the device, what type of app do you want to use to look at this web content? Do you like Chrome? Do you like the built-in browser? Do you like, there's many, many browsers in Android. And many, many people install lots of different browsers. The same type of thing with a PDF reader. What do you want to launch this PDF in? So even though it's in your app, it's very common to have these questions pop up inside of an application. Which video player do you like to use? Which music player do you like to use? Which photo gallery do you like to use? And so in iOS, we're so used to just transparently moving to the PDF and assuming that the user will be happy because that's the way everyone in iOS views PDF, and that's true. But if you jump to that assumption in Android and say, oh, everyone wants the native movie player to watch this movie, that's not always true. And everyone wants the native photo gallery or the native whatever. It's hard to get your head around if you're not using Android every day as a person, in that world. And so if you're an iOS developer or you're an iOS-centric person, you'll make assumptions that just aren't right. And your app will end up being iOS-y almost by accident. And then you don't realize why your audience doesn't embrace it. So it's very complicated. So it's the same content. It's the same content. But there's small little changes in the way that things work and the way that things, long tapping on a menu row. You don't do that as much in iOS. You swipe left to delete an item in a list, and the little delete button shows up. But in iOS, you hold. There's small little changes, and so all the way down to the way that it looks. The way that it looks. When I launch an Android app, it's pretty common. And really the acid test, this is the way that we should do it as developers, is just look at the most successful apps. Look at the Evernotes, look at the Netflixes, look at Gmail and YouTube video player, and the most successful apps that are out there, Flipboard, they're not the same on iOS and Android. They understand and they spend a lot of money embracing highly talented people to help them come up with these decisions, and what you find is it's the same concept. Netflix plays movies, Gmail helps you check your email, but they do it a little bit differently, and both audiences are happy with the implementation. Same ideas, though. It shows email, same content, same movies, that kind of stuff. Good question, Warren.
Yeah, I never really thought of it that way. So, but it makes a lot of sense. Again, it's like you say, your perspective. I'm an iPhone user. I'm an iOS user.
Right.
I don't have an Android device, so
Mm-hmm.
I would think that I wouldn't understand that concept.
Right. And it's easy as a developer to fall on a favorite. Call it falling on a favorite. And one thing that I really hope that somebody will come up with, and this is just one of my crazy ideas again, it's obviously not going to happen, but I want to pick up a different phone each day. I'm more than willing to pay the money to have a bunch of phones because I'm a developer and it's my living, and just like a mechanic might have a bunch of tools in his toolbox, I'd like to have 4 or 5 or 6 different phones. However, I can't have 4 or 5 or 6 different accounts with Verizon or AT&T or my carrier, not because it's not possible to pay for them, although I wouldn't want to. I want my same phone number to ring. I can't carry different phones around and have the same phone number, so why can't I take my little SIM card and slide it in the side of today's phone and be an Android guy today? It's frustrating, and I'm sure somebody in our audience will tell me, oh, you can do that, but I don't think I can. I think it's more complicated than that, because I think the SIM card isn't the same in the iPhone as it is in the Android, and it's just frustrating to me. Something as simple as like the memory stick, right? I mean, if it slides in, it slides in.
Right. But you're right. I think from a phone company's perspective, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, it must be. It must be, and obviously they must have, you know, things to consider that I would never consider, and so